Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So let me see. There are some trigger warnings for this particular chapter, mostly for sexual themes and I don't want to say coercion, but there's some consent things that get a little slidey. So if that is not something that you're comfortable with, then I highly suggest sitting this one out. But without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 4. The Girl in the Cage. Harry and Hermione were already standing outside the infirmary when Ginny arrived later. She had had to wait for many agonizing minutes inside the Great Hall until, in the chaos, she could slip away undetected. She made a beeline for the hospital wing, Ron in reluctant tow behind her. No matter what shape Draco was in, they would have to bring him there eventually, even if he was... Well, but that didn't bear thinking about. The infirmary door was shut fast, and outside in the hall stood Harry, with Hermione beside him. "What's going on?" Ron asked, looking from one white face to the other. "Is Malfoy all right?" Hermione shrugged hopelessly. "We don't really know." "They're not telling us a bloody thing," Harry said irritably. Ginny looked at Hermione. "How bad do you think it is?" she asked quietly. Hermione shook her head. "Very bad," she said, her voice pitched low, as if she didn't want Harry to overhear. She put her hand on Ginny's elbow and steered her and Ron away. "We saw him briefly," she said, still in the same quiet voice. "He was lying in the snow, and there was blood all around him. A lot of blood. I think it was coming from his shoulder. Harry went to try to stop the bleeding and..." Hermione bit her lip. "Then Lupin and Charlie and the rest of the teachers came, and they pulled Harry back. We couldn't see what was going on. Harry was fighting to get away, but Lupin grabbed him, and Charlie picked Draco up and put him on the stretcher. Madame Pomfrey took him through an opening into the castle, and we all followed her. But when we got here, they shut us out of the door." Ron looked as if he were going to say something, but paused as the infirmary door opened and Charlie stepped out, closing the door behind him. He looked weary. The front of his shirt and sleeves were soaked in blood, where he must have carried Draco. He looked at the three of them standing clustered together, and then at Harry and said, "Draco's going to be all right." Ginny exhaled, feeling as if she were letting out a breath she had been holding for hours. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. He lost a lot of blood. I know it looked nasty, but that was all it was. The wound was in his shoulder, so nothing vital was damaged." Hermione stepped forward. "Can we see him?" Charlie shook his head. "No, not yet. He's out cold. It looks as if we may have been out there for several hours, and nearly froze to death. Look, you should all head off to class. There's nothing you can do right now." "Just one thing," said a soft voice. Ginny turned. It was Harry, standing there quietly, his dark eyes in the torchlight. "What happened to him exactly?" Charlie shook his head. "We've no idea, Harry." "Well, what does it look like?" Harry demanded. "An accident?" "No," said Charlie slowly. "Not an accident." Harry's jaw set. "Was it a magical attack? A spell? Some kind of creature?" "Harry," Charlie replied flatly, "go to class." "No." "Harry," Charlie began in a placating tone, "I want to know who or what was responsible for this, and I want to know now." Harry snapped back. "What are you not telling us?" "What's going on here?" It was Professor Lupin, who had opened the infirmary door behind Charlie. He looked from Charlie's exasperated face to Harry's pale, set one. "Did you tell them Draco's fine?" "No," said Charlie irritably. "I felt like keeping it to myself so I could make it a really big surprise." Lupin shut the door behind him and turned to face Harry. "I want to know what really happened," Harry said, and made a sweeping gesture towards the infirmary door. "Harry," Hermione interjected gently, "we'll go to class and come back after. Maybe then they'll know a bit more." Harry glanced at her. She was looking at him with large, worried eyes. Beside her, Ron looked taken aback by the force of Harry's anger. "I'm family," he said. "I have a right to know." "Yes, you do," said Lupin, "and as soon as we know, we will tell you. Hanging about in the corridor won't do any good. Go to class. There's no need to come back." Ron reached for Harry's arm, but Harry shook him off. He was staring at Lupin. "You're keeping something from me," he said intently. "We're not keeping anything from you," Lupin said sharply. "You know what we know." Harry started to speak again, but Lupin cut him off. "Draco is going to be fine, but he's still very weak, and in pain. We need to be taking care of him, and instead you are wasting our time out here. Think about it." Hermione took hold of Harry's arm. "We're going," she said, and gestured with her chin for Ron and Ginny to follow. Harry went with Hermione unwillingly, looking back over his shoulder at Lupin and Charlie until they turned the corner of the hallway and were once again alone, at which point Hermione turned to Harry, her hand still on his arm. "There's no need to talk to Charlie like that," she began. Harry jerked his arm away from her as soon as they had stopped walking and glared in her direction. "And you don't need to lead me around as if I'm a child," he snapped. Hermione dropped her hand, looking fed up. "Then quit acting like one," she snapped back. Ginny felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Ron. "We'll just be going now," he said, very loudly, although neither of his two friends turned to look at him. There's this thing that we have to do, very soon, like now." "Right," Ginny agreed. "That thing we have to do." And she fled after Ron, but not before she caught another glimpse of Harry and Hermione glaring fiercely at each other. Harry's hands were balled into fists in his pockets, and Hermione was pale and tight-lipped. She was glad not to have to stay to watch this fight. She caught up to her brother as they turned the next corner and were soon out of sight. "Harry Potter," Hermione was saying after they had gone, her voice seething with rage. "How can you be so self-centered, inconsiderate, obstinate, selfish? Are you done yet?" Harry asked in a bored tone. "No," she snapped, anger making her irrational. "Not nearly." Harry looked at her without moving. His green eyes had gone nearly black, but otherwise his face was expressionless. "Fine," he said. "Owl me when you finish this pointless diatribe, then." And he turned around and walked away. Before she even realized what she was doing, Hermione had fumbled her wand out of her sleeve. "Petrificus partialis!" she cried, and Harry froze where he was, his feet seemingly nailed to the stone floor. He twisted around and glared. "Oh, very mature, Hermione." She shoved her wand back into her sleeve and regarded him grimly. "I'm immature? That's amusing, coming from you." "Don't talk about things you don't understand," said Harry in a withering tone. "Oh, I understand," she said. "I understand more than you think." Harry crossed his arms over his chest. "Enlighten me, then." His tone was heavy with sarcasm. Hermione pointed her finger at him and spoke in a voice that trembled with tension. "I may not know what's bothering you," she said, "but I know that something is. And whatever it is, it's poisoning you from the inside out. You're turning into someone I don't know, Harry. Maybe even into someone I don't even like. For a moment, he looked stricken and ducked his head immediately, his jaw set, hiding the hurt in his eyes. But she had seen it. She had not expected that, and felt mildly taken aback. When she spoke again, it was with less rancor. I've always admired you, Harry. Not just because you're brave, but because you're kind, and because you hold yourself to such a high standard, higher than anyone would ever think of holding you to. And you've never had any self-pity, even when you were entitled to it. So, when I see you treating your friends like enemies, like you just did with Lupin, that's not you, Harry. That's not who you are. Harry didn't move. He was looking down at the floor, his shoulders tense. I shouldn't have said that to Lupin, but you don't understand. So explain it to me. Harry closed his eyes. I've always known that one day Voldemort would strike at those closest to me. I've always tried to prepare myself. I could either choose never to love anyone and close myself off to that particular threat, or I could swear to protect the people I do love, no matter what happens. I chose the second option, mostly because of you. He opened his eyes and looked at her again, his gaze green and steady. You gave me a choice, to love you or lose you, and I couldn't stand losing you. The anger that Hermione had felt was dissipating fast. Exasperated as she was, it went against every fiber of everything she had been for the past 6 years to hurt Harry deliberately. Do you resent me for that? She asked. I think I do, said Harry slowly. His hands were knotted together, as if he were nervous. She wanted to go to him, but held herself back. This was the most he'd said to her, the most open he had been in months. Maybe I blame you for teaching me how to be vulnerable. There's all sorts of ways Voldemort can get at me, besides you. Ron, Sirius, Ginny, Draco. But if it hadn't been for you... What makes you think what happened to Draco has anything to do with you in the first place? Harry blinked. Well, what else would it be? Not everything is about you, Harry, Hermione replied gently. But if you want me to say sorry for making you feel vulnerable, then I will. No, he said after a moment, his tone much softer than it had been. Don't apologize. You haven't done anything you need to apologize for. Her breath caught in her throat. His eyes were on hers, full of concern, but they were animated and alive. He was present as he had not been in a long while. We should go to class, she said, her voice very soft. Oh, right. You run along, he said. She blinked. You're not coming? Well, I would, he replied patiently, but someone stuck my feet to the floor. Oh! Hermione felt herself blush. Harry began to laugh, and as she took her wand out and removed the hex on him, found that she was laughing, too. You're sure he'll be all right? I'm sure. Lupin tried to make his voice as soothing as possible. Sirius was looking extremely anxious, and he was sure that some of the heat radiating out from the fire through which they were conversing was Sirius's anxiety, and not just the flames. He's perfectly fine, just worn out, and his shoulder has to heal. And you're sure we shouldn't come to school? I am sure, Sirius. There's no need. Draco is fine, and if you come here, it'll just worry him and all his friends. Make them think that something serious is going on. Something serious? He could have died! I know, but think about it. How many times did you land in the hospital wing? That was only because we were stupid. Harry is one thing, but Draco? He doesn't do reckless things. He's too careful about that. Whatever happened, he wasn't expecting it. Lupin sighed and leaned back against the legs of the chair he'd pulled up to the fireplace. It was a puncture wound. A regular puncture wound. Possibly a knife or an arrow. Whatever it was had been pulled out. It could have even been a duel gone wrong, or even a spell Draco was trying to cast on himself, which backfired. We just don't know. Dumbledore's looking into it. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Well, it's good to see that both you and Harry are taking this equally well. What do you mean? Did Harry do something? Lupin shook his head. No. He did throw a tantrum, though. Accused me of hiding things and not telling him what was happening. Basically, of lying. Sirius swore quietly and raked a hand through his black hair. Not grey yet, although Lupin had a feeling that if Harry and Draco kept up their near brushes with death, that would change. You aren't surprised? No, said Sirius ruefully. I tried to have a talk with him the other night, because I was worried. He seemed so thin and pale. I thought, maybe problems with Hermione? Or maybe he was anxious about the wedding. But he just shut me out. Sirius, has something happened to him lately to damage his trust? Sirius's mouth tightened, but instead of answering Lupin's question, said instead, You're sure we shouldn't come? Dumbledore specifically said no. Lupin hesitated. How's Narcissa? Sirius's eyes darkened. Not very well. She had to take half a filler of tranquility solution just to lie down. Lupin sighed. I'm sorry. He was about to add more when there was a knock at his office door. He got to his feet and went to open it, keeping his body between himself and the fireplace, blocking Sirius from whomever might be on the other side of the door. To his surprise, it was Harry. Hello, Professor, he said. Can I talk to you for a second? Lupin looked at the boy on the threshold. Sirius had been right. Harry did look thin and pale, and more tired than he had ever seen him look before. The shadows under his eyes seemed bruised. You should know I'm not alone, Lupin replied, but Harry had already looked past him and saw Sirius in the fireplace. His hands tightened at his sides, but he showed no other expression of nervousness. Sirius, Harry said quietly, are you all right? Sirius nodded. Fine, Harry. His eyes went to Lupin. Could you give us a moment? Without even thinking about it, Lupin nodded and went out of the room, closing the door after him. He leaned back against the wall and sighed. The look on Sirius's face when Harry had appeared at the door, Lupin had recognized that potent cocktail of hope, love, concern, and fear. Certainly it was the way his own father had looked at him when the letter of acceptance had come from Hogwarts. He remembered hearing his parents' voices through the bedroom wall that night. He can't go. He's so small for his age. And what will the other students do? How will they treat him? What if he gets hurt? Or hurts somebody else? We can't keep him shut up forever. Can't he have a normal life? If there was one thing Lupin had learned since then, was that there was no such thing as a normal life. Not for some people. Not for himself, and not for Harry. He had been branded by the bite of a wolf. Harry was branded by something much graver and much darker. It showed itself now in his eyes and the knowledge in them, as much as in the scar on his forehead. The office door opened, and Harry looked round it. "You can come back in, Professor," he said. He wasn't smiling exactly, but seemed relieved, as if a burden on him had been lightened. Lupin presumed that he and Sirius must have made up after their fight. "Sorry I kicked you out of your office." Lupin followed Harry back inside and bid goodbye to Sirius, who was also looking a deal more cheerful. "Right then, Sirius. I'll meet tomorrow?" "Will do," said the other man, and disappeared in a shower of blue-green sparks. Lupin turned to look at Harry. "What was it you wanted to see me about?" Harry considered a moment. "It was about the DADA homework, actually." Despite himself, Lupin was surprised. Usually when Harry wound up in his or any other teacher's office, it had little to do with homework and more to do with life-threatening emergencies. "What about it, Harry?" "Well, I know we were supposed to have chosen our assignment today. Obviously, I understand if you and Draco need some time to get that to me. A week's extension would—" "No, that's just it. We chose already." Harry took out a parchment and handed it to Lupin, who received it with surprise. "We want to do the research project on dark locations. We'd like to go to Shepton Mallet. I just wanted to let you know so that you could start getting a portkey for us. I know they take a while to make." Lupin looked at Harry with some bemusement. Harry returned his gaze, his green eyes very clear behind his glasses. He was reminded of James when he was hiding something, or up to mischief. What was going on with the boy? Unfortunately, nothing he could put his finger on, exactly. Perhaps he was being overly suspicious. Surely Harry and Draco wouldn't be up to anything, given the condition Draco was in. "All right then, Harry. I'll get it ready for you. In the meantime, while Draco's in the infirmary, I suggest you tell him not to worry about schoolwork. He needs to rest." Harry nodded. "Sure. I'll tell him we can work on it later, if it doesn't interfere with the wedding." Lupin nodded. "Of course. Are you looking forward to that?" Harry looked briefly surprised, then shrugged. "I haven't thought about it, really. I've been so busy with classes and Quidditch, and I haven't bought anything for Sirius and Narcissa yet." "Well, the shops in Hogsmeade should be staying open tomorrow night, shouldn't they?" Harry blinked at him. "Tomorrow?" "The pub crawl, Harry." "Oh! Right." Harry nodded. "Sure. I'll get something then." He looked down at the gold pocket watch that glimmered on his wrist. As always, when Lupin saw that watch, his throat tightened. Standing there in the dim half-light, with his dark, untidy head bent over the familiar watch, Harry could have been James. "I've got to go, Professor," he said. "I've got class." "Sure." Lupin flicked his wand towards the door, and it swung open. Harry went out, then paused for a moment on the threshold. "I'm sorry I snapped at you earlier." Lupin nodded. "I was sharp with you, and I'm sorry too. You were concerned about your friend, and it does you credit. You've always been just like your father that way." Harry's eyes lit up. "Thanks, Professor." Lupin shrugged. "It's just the truth." Harry shifted his rucksack higher on his shoulder. "Thanks for letting me use your office to talk to Sirius." Lupin nodded. His throat was still tight, and he did not want to speak. He watched as Harry walked out of his office and was gone. Then he shut the door and sat down at his desk, looking into the fire. For the first time in his life, he felt suddenly old. Draco woke to a splintering pain in his head, and the feeling that someone was sitting on his chest. He dragged his heavy eyelids up and saw a stone-arched ceiling above him and white screens on either side of his bed. The infirmary. He sat up slowly and looked down at himself. Someone had dressed him in blue and white pinstripe pajamas, and there were blankets heaped on the bed. He wondered how he'd gotten here, and who had dressed him. Obviously, not somebody who understood that Malfoys did not wear flannel. He closed his eyes and cast his mind back to the last thing he remembered. He recalled Rhysand screaming, himself pushing her away, the world turning upside down, silver inverting into black. What had happened? What had injured him? He remembered a strange sound and the sharp pain in his shoulder. A sound like a bow and arrow? But who would go around shooting students with a bow and arrow, especially when an unforgivable curse was so much quicker? He unbuttoned his pajama top and shrugged it off, but his shoulder was tightly bandaged and offered no evidence. It was still slightly sore, and he winced when he touched the wrappings, even lightly. Slowly, he leaned back against the pillows, his mind lost in recollection. He rested there for a moment in the quiet darkness, his mind swimming with questions, not the least of which was how long he had been out cold in the infirmary. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts range outward, slowly, trying something he had done before, searching the castle with his mind, seeking a familiar presence, one bound to him by an unbreakable cord of telepathy and magic. He found him, like a pinpoint of light in the darkness. "Potter," he whispered into the darkness. "Potter, are you awake?" There was a moment of startled silence, and then Harry replied, "I am. Are you all right?" "I think so." "Where are you? Infirmary still?" "Yes." "All right. Stay where you are. I'll be right there. Trust me when I say I'm not going anywhere." There was no response. Harry was probably distracted. Draco busied himself with shrugging his pajama top back on and buttoning it up, which hurt rather more than he would have liked it to. He could not still a small, cold fear. He remembered stories his father had told him of magical poisons. But no, he would surely be dead already if he'd been poisoned. There was a faint rattle, and the curtain around his bed was pulled back. He sat up straight as Harry appeared, the invisibility cloak falling at his feet as he stepped forward. He had obviously dressed quickly. His green sweater was on inside out, and his hair was even more of a disaster than usual. "Malfoy," Harry said, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Are you okay?" Draco tried to push the thought of deadly poisons out of his mind. "I'm all right. Did you think I wouldn't be?" Harry drew out the chain that hung around his throat and looked down at it. In the half-light, the gold epicelical charm glimmered dully. "I knew you weren't dead," he said quietly, then let the chain drop back into his shirt. "What happened?" "I'll tell you in a second. Reach into that nightstand and get me my clothes, will you?" Harry gave him a narrow look. "Why?" "Because I want something that's in the shirt pocket," he said. Harry shrugged and did as he asked, tossing the shirt to him once he found it in the bottom drawer. Draco unfolded it and blinked. It was ruined. Unsurprisingly, the right shoulder, a stiffened mass of blood, and torn fabric where they had obviously cut it down at the front to remove it from his body. Harry looked vaguely sickened. "You lost a lot of blood." "Obviously," said Draco, still staring down at the shirt. "It was rarely expensive, too." He looked up at Harry, who was looking expectant, and sighed. "I went outside to meet Rhysand, my cousin, up on the tower." Harry raised an eyebrow at him. "I didn't think you took the whole pureblood aspect of your family so seriously, Malfoy?" Draco gave him a blank stare. "What? Oh! No, Potter! And if you make another crack about that, I will twist your head off and use it as a quaffle." Okay. Harry subsided, his eyes shining with silent mirth. "So? Why did she come to see you?" Draco sighed and explained about Rhys, about the letters from his father, the maps that led to secret meeting places, the cryptic messages, and finally, the attack on them both. "I've no idea who she really is," he finished, "or what she wants, or whether the person who shot at us was trying to kill me or her." Harry was staring at him with saucer eyes. "Your father is alive?" Draco nodded. "Your father is alive, and you didn't tell me?" Draco looked at his hands. "Dumbledore made me swear not to tell you. I'm sorry. I wanted to." Draco heard him sigh. "But you're telling me now. You're breaking your promise." "I could have died," Draco said. "And if I did die, you and Hermione would deserve to know why and how." He looked up and saw Harry staring at him with a tense expression. The other boy hesitated, and then his face relaxed into a smile. "Thanks," he said, and Draco felt gratified despite himself. "What do the letters say, Malfoy?" "Not much. Here, I'll read you the last one she gave me." Draco pulled the parchment, remarkably unharmed, out of his shirt pocket, where he had tucked it, and unrolled it. "Draco, lo, these many years we have waited, you and I, for your true birthday to dawn. Remember this. True obedience requires no illusions. Soon you will know everything." Draco shrugged. "That's it." Harry opened his mouth to make a remark about annoying letters who insisted on being cryptic, when the letter in Draco's hand suddenly caught fire. Draco swore and dropped it, and it turned to ash before it hit the stone floor. "They always do that," he said sulkily, putting his burned thumb in his mouth. "I guess so I can't keep them as evidence." "What does that mean, your true birthday?" "No idea." "Didn't it ever occur to you to try to find out what a true birthday might be? And how am I meant to do that exactly?" "Well," said Harry as if it were obvious, "ask Hermione. If she doesn't know, she could find out for you." "I'd rather not bring anyone else into this." "Hermione isn't anyone else," Harry pointed out. "She's Hermione. You can tell her anything." "Which is why you told her about our little graveyard excursion?" Harry opened his mouth to say something, and shut it with a snap. "That's different." "Why? Because it's your big secret?" "Because nobody's trying to kill me." Draco replied, then yawned hugely. He was growing more and more tired. "Someone's always trying to kill you, Potter. You wouldn't be you if they weren't." Harry was silent for a moment. His right hand was playing with the loop of his belt, with the odd-looking scarlet bangle that he never seemed to go without. "I don't think you should trust her. Rhys, I mean," he said finally. "Thank you, I don't." Draco yawned again. "Potter, I was thinking—" "What?" "Well, if you ask Lupin to give you a portkey that'll take you to Doom's Hill, won't he guess why you're going there?" "Right. That's why I told him that we want to go to Shepton Mallet instead. Cunning plans, Malfoy, remember? The big thing is to get off of school grounds." "So, how am I meant to get from that Mallet place to Doom's Hill?" "Leave that to me." Harry smiled, then stopped. "But you're sure? You still want to go?" Want to might be a little strong. I'm still willing. I'll be fine once I've had some sleep, I'm pretty sure. Draco leaned back against the pillows and shut his eyes. You do realize, he said sleepily, that this means we're going to have to do an entire report on Shepton Mallet for no damn good reason at all. He yawned a final time, but never heard what Harry said in response. He had already fallen asleep. He was in the tower room once more, and his father was there, as was Voldemort. He stood at a different angle now, and could see out the tall, narrow windows. They showed an unfamiliar landscape, a ridged valley dropping away into wooded trees. The night sky was high and black, the stars like naked daggers. Lucius and Voldemort stood together by a huge golden cage, the kind that might have held a lion or a tiger. Instead, it held a woman, a slender woman clad only in her long black hair, which swirled around her like smoke, hiding her body. It was not until she raised her face that he knew her. Rhysand. Draco's eyelids flew open. It was morning. The infirmary was full of light, and Charlie Weasley was standing at the foot of his bed. He looked as if he had come directly from feeding his baby dragon, since his face and dark wool robes were dusted with soot. Draco sat up gingerly against the piled pillows and found he could move without much pain. There was a dull ache in his shoulder, but nothing else. "Well," Charlie said suddenly, "how are you feeling?" "Fine," said Draco, in what he hoped was a truthful voice. "I was having a dream before." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "Anything interesting?" The image of Rhysand flashed before his eyes, but he decided against telling Charlie what he had seen. "Something involving Professor Sinestra," he said. Now Charlie looked positively embarrassed. "Oh, well, I mean, she is awfully..." He cleared his throat. "Dumbledore will be here any second," he said, by way of subject change. Draco opened his mouth to reply, when suddenly the curtain was drawn back, and Professor Dumbledore entered, followed by Madame Pomfrey and Professor Snape. Instinctively, Draco sat back and rubbed his shoulder ruefully. "I just want everyone to remember," he remarked, "that I've lost a great deal of blood. I might be delirious." "It's all right, Mr. Malfoy," said Dumbledore, his eyes kind and serious as they rested on his face. He waved a hand, and 4 high-backed chairs appeared around the bed. Dumbledore sat down, then Madame Pomfrey, Snape, and Charlie followed suit. "Before you tell us what you know," Dumbledore began, "why don't we tell you what we know? We were first alerted to your plight when a Hufflepuff first year came racing into the Great Hall yesterday morning, announcing that she had found Draco Malfoy lying in a snowbank, quite dead. As you can imagine, this caused something of a stir." "Mass suicides among the fifth-year girls, I imagine," said Draco cheerfully. "Perhaps the morning was not quite so extreme," said Dumbledore, "although there was much concern at the Slytherin table, and several Gryffindors made remarkable scenes. As you can imagine, much haste was made to reach you. You were, as reported, lying in a snowbank, inert and drenched in blood. We brought you back here, where it was discovered that the source of your injury was a puncture in your right shoulder. It was deemed non-magical in nature, and both your hypothermia and blood loss were quickly treated. You may thank Professor Snape for providing us with a potion that is usually used to treat vampire attacks, which restored to you the blood you had lost." Vampire attacks? Draco echoed, thinking of Rhys again, her white skin and red lips. She had said she wasn't a vampire, but... "You were not bitten by a vampire, Draco," said Madame Pomfrey, "but we would love to know how you did come to be injured. Do you know who attacked you?" There was a long silence. "I was outside," Draco said slowly. "I was heading down to the Quidditch pitch to meet someone." "Who?" Snape's question snapped towards him like a striking cobra. "Potter," said Draco promptly, "because we were going to work on our homework for our DADA project, and it had to be done at night, because constructing a locator charm requires star charts." He finished weakly. "And you couldn't do that from the astronomy tower?" Charlie demanded. "Too crowded with people snogging," said Draco firmly. "Terrible working conditions. And while I was waiting for Potter," he continued, mildly wishing that Harry was still around to help him with this bold-faced lie, "I was practicing a bit of magic on my own, and I threw a curse that rebounded and hit me in the arm." "Perhaps a priori incantatum might be in order here," said Snape silkily. "Oh, I didn't use my wand," Draco put in quickly and raised his left hand. "Magic spells," said Snape darkly. "Out of bed after dark, using curses. Vilch would string you up in the dungeons by your thumbs for this." "May I remind you," said Draco, "that detention is a time-honored form of punishment." "And detention you shall have," said Dumbledore, "commencing when you return from Christmas holidays. As well as 20 points from your house, I will consider the damage done to you physically to be the rest of your punishment." Draco looked at the ground, and then, after a moment, said, "Headmaster," he began slowly, "the scenes you spoke of, made by the Gryffindors, won't the... what will the other students... won't they wonder about? Their reactions?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled briefly. "I trust you and your friends to fabricate a story they'll believe," he said. "I have the utmost faith in you." "Thanks, Professor," Draco said, not exactly sure what he was thanking him for, but feeling grateful nonetheless. "And we're sorry." Both Snape and Charlie looked at Dumbledore, who shrugged and rose creakily to his feet. "Very well," he said. "I would like to see you in my office later, Mr. Malfoy, after Madame Pomfrey releases you. Alone," he clarified. Draco felt himself flush. "Of course, Professor." "He's lying to us," said Charlie. "Isn't he, Headmaster?" Dumbledore glanced up from his position behind his desk at the young man in front of him. His eyes, behind the gold-rimmed spectacles, were not twinkling at all, but somber and thoughtful. "Who is lying, Charles?" "Draco," said Charlie. He got up from where he had been sitting across from the headmaster, feeling unaccountably restless, and crossed to the north wall, where there was a window that looked out over the grounds. Outside, the sky was heavy and leaden, the pearly gray of the winter seascape. He could clearly see the Quidditch pitch from here, the hoops reaching into the sky like bare, striped tree branches. There was a collection of small figures gathered down by the pitch entrance, although they were too far away for him to make them out clearly. "That was no duel gone wrong that got him that injury," he said, resting a hand on the window pane. "Most assuredly," said Dumbledore, his eyes shadowed. "You were the first teacher to arrive at Draco's side, weren't you?" Charlie nodded. "Did you notice how many sets of footprints there were around him?" Charlie nodded, recollecting. "I was just thinking that, Professor. There were only one set of footprints. That Hufflepuff girl's. He must have fallen from somewhere, not walked." "Yes, I believe he did," said the headmaster. "Now, if I'm not much mistaken, the North Tower is off limits this year, correct?" Charlie stifled a snort. "You say that as if the term meant anything for most of the students here." "Indeed," replied Dumbledore. "The question we need answered is, why? Would he bother going up there?" Charlie looked back down at the crowd standing on the Quidditch pitch. Two bright red heads leapt out at him immediately. Ron and Ginny. Seamus Finnegan and Elizabeth Thomas were there too, as were the Creevey brothers. The Gryffindor team must be having its practice. The players were all looking towards the farther end of the pitch, where Harry was standing. He seemed to be pointing from the hoops and back, illustrating some point of game mechanics. "What shall we do about Draco in the meantime?" he asked. "Should we look into protective charms, or send him home, or—" "No," said Dumbledore. "We will do nothing." Charlie looked back at the headmaster in surprise. "Nothing? Isn't that a bit dangerous?" "I cannot help but feel," said Dumbledore slowly, "that any and all efforts made to protect either Draco or Harry in this instance will be both gratuitous and counterproductive. Neither boy willingly takes to being protected. You saw how Harry reacted to the suggestion that you were trying to shield him from knowledge he might not like, even though you were not. Should we try to constrain them, they will rebel, and we may lose them entirely." Charlie was silent a moment, then looked back at the pitch in time to see Harry take off on his broomstick and soar up into the air above his teammates. "But if they were to ask for help, we should help them?" he asked, still trying to make sense of what Dumbledore had just said. "I think you know by now that neither boy would ever ask for help," Dumbledore said. "The first 11 years of Harry's life he grew up knowing that were he to cry out in a nightmare, no one would come to comfort him, that if he were in pain, he could expect no aid or sympathy, that if he were lost, no one would trouble to find him, that if he died, he would not be mourned. And Draco, while in a much grander house, received similar treatment at the hands of his father. Such an upbringing hardly breeds children who readily seek assistance in times of trouble." "Headmaster, with all due respect." "Yes?" "Draco's situation is unfortunate, but Harry's? That was the childhood you chose for him." "Yes," said Dumbledore. "Yes, I did." When Ginny left Quidditch practice, she found Ron and Hermione standing on the snowy path that led up from the pitch to school, waiting for her. They were deep in conversation. Ron's head bent over Hermione's brown one, and she had to clear her throat loudly to get their attention. They spun around, looking surprised. "Hey, Ginny," said Hermione. "I was just telling Ron that I'm skipping lunch and going to see Draco in the hospital wing. Would you like to come along?" Ginny was surprised. "He's awake?" "He's awake," said Hermione, "and Harry's on his way to see him. He said we should come." "I'm surprised he waited so long," Ginny mused as they started to walk up the path. "I just assumed he'd be there all day and skip Quidditch practice." "Agreed," said Ron, and held out a hand to help Hermione up the iced-over steps. "The way he's been acting, he probably assumes that if he doesn't check up on Malfoy constantly, the sorry sod might stop breathing." Ron, don't say that, Hermione admonished gently. Harry's just being a friend. He'd do it for you. Reaching the top of the stairs, she let go of his hand. In fact, I think you should come with us. Oh, Ron moaned, looking mutinous. Can't I just clean out the prefect's bathroom instead? Something fun? Draco saved your life once, said Hermione severely. So? I saved his life twice. Can't you just pretend to like him, as a favor to me? Hermione asked. Ron's resistance seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon. Fine. Hermione smiled sunnily. Good, let's go. And she pushed open the castle doors, gesturing for the other two to follow her. As Ginny trailed behind the others, she felt her heart give an absurd little leap. Her relief that Draco was all right was tempered with nervousness about seeing him, especially now that she was almost sure that he was the one who had kissed her while she was sleeping. Madame Pomfrey let them in to the infirmary with only a perfunctory eye roll. Inside, the room was warm and full of light, and in the far end of the huge room, Ginny could see a still figure lying on a bed against the wall. Malcolm Baddock, she assumed. Ginny looked quickly away and fixed her eyes on another white-curtained bed. She could see shadows behind it, someone sitting upright, and someone with messy hair in a chair beside them. As they drew nearer, she began to hear Harry's voice, and then Draco's in response. The Wronski feint is not a better move than the Lotskin parallel slide. What hallucinogenic potions have you been swallowing, Potter? Hermione paused at the foot of the bed and pulled the curtain back. Ginny and Ron joined her in time to see Harry look up and laugh. It was such a sudden change from his regular sulky mood that Ginny stared at him in surprise. He looked bright-eyed, awake, and almost lively. It was as if something had shocked him out of his self-imposed exile from the rest of the world. Hermione, however, was giving Draco a critical stare. He was sitting propped up in bed, his back against a stack of pillows that looked as if they had been pilfered from other empty beds. He looked almost normal, perhaps a little tired, but his face was flushed with a healthy color, and his bandaged shoulder looked whole, although the standard-issue pajamas he was wearing made him look about 6 years younger. "You're all right?" she asked him, her voice gentle. "Yeah." Draco's voice was strong, normal. It was hard to believe that he had been wounded not long ago. His eyes went to Ron and Ginny. "Hello, Weasley." He paused. "Ginny?" Ron nodded at him, and Ginny said, "I'm glad you're okay. Did they tell you when you would be out?" "Today, probably," Draco said. "So you'll be able to go to the pub crawl?" she asked. Draco shrugged. "I wasn't going to go anyway," he said. "Weasley here has me hanging about, pestering the sixth years, don't you?" Ron was annoyed. "You volunteered?" he said. "Oh, but that won't take all night," said Hermione as she sat down at the foot of the bed, looking anxious. "Will it? You should still go, Draco. You only get one pub crawl." She twisted herself around and looked at Ron. "He doesn't have to stay at school all night, does he?" Now Ron looked decidedly uncomfortable. "Well," Draco shrugged, looking piteous. "I'll see how I feel. I mean, I did agree to do it. Although perhaps if I'm feeling very weak and ill, it might not be the best thing for Malfoy," said Ron, sounding exasperated. "If you're well enough to be let out, you're well enough to sit in the Great Hall and watch the door." Draco looked even more piteous, and might have said more, but at that moment the curtain was drawn aside to reveal Blaise, her green eyes bright and her fiery hair tumbling around her shoulders. Hermione leapt up from where she had been sitting and backed away, as Blaze advanced on Draco, who looked alarmed. "Blaze?" he began. "Darling," she said, and launched herself onto the bed and threw her arms around Draco, embracing him fiercely. "I came as soon as I possibly could. I was absolutely frightened to death." Draco patted her back awkwardly. There, he said, or at least that was what Ginny thought he said. His voice was muffled against Blaze. "I'm fine. No harm done." "No harm done? You could have been killed. Were you dueling?" Blaze pulled back. "And if you were, why didn't you pick me as your second? You know perfectly well I'm better at slashing hexes and transfiguration torments than anyone else in school." "I'll just pretend I didn't hear that," Ron said, and cleared his throat. Blaze twisted around in the circle of Draco's arms and looked at him. Then she smiled, a kittenish, amused smile, her eyes sliding down to Ron's head boy badge. "I'm sorry, Weasley," she said. "I didn't notice you standing there." Then her eyes slid to Harry, and then to Hermione and Ginny. "What is this? A Gryffindor invasion? Come to see if you could finish him off?" "That's right," said Harry with heavy sarcasm. "We thought if we showed up in a big group, we could kill him under the cover of broad daylight, and nobody would notice." "Sounds like a typical Gryffindor plan," sniffed Blaze. "Honestly, I understand you have to check on Draco for his mum, Potter, but did you need to bring your bodyguards?" Harry looked deadpan. "I couldn't help it," he said, glancing from Hermione to Ginny to Ron. "They're just so cute, bless their little cotton socks." Ron opened his mouth to say something, but was cut off by an enormous clang, as if someone had dropped a pile of dishes. Ginny jumped and leaned around one of the sheets that blocked off the bed. Madame Pomfrey was standing a little ways away, filling charm packets at a small dispensary on the wall. She had turned around as well, and was staring towards the far bed, where Malcolm Baddock had been lying inert. Only he was no longer inert. He was moving, apparently struggling to sit up. On the floor beside his bed lay a shattered glass of water, knocked off the bedside table. With an exclamation of, "Good heavens!" Madame Pomfrey turned and rushed across the room. Ginny drew her head back inside and turned around. The others were looking at her curiously. "Malcolm Badham's awake," she announced. Blaze's mouth fell open. "He is?" Ginny nodded. "Looks like it." Draco tapped Blaze gently on the shoulder. "Go see if he's all right, will you?" Blaze didn't need to be told twice. With a distracted glance at Draco, she slid off the bed, got to her feet, and raced out of the small enclosure, brushing by Ron as she went. Ginny did a double take as her gaze fell on her brother. Ron had gotten terribly white, and had grabbed hold of a chair back to steady himself, as if he were afraid he might fall over. "Ron?" she said, shocked. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "I don't feel well," he said, his voice tight. "Well, you've come to the right place," said Draco. "Shut up, Malfoy," said Ron, and there was no humor in it, and no teasing. Draco looked surprised. Ginny looked at her brother, worried. "Can I get you some water?" she asked, and he nodded. She summoned an empty glass and went to fill it at the infirmary's small sink, which was situated near Malcolm's bed. Malcolm was sitting up, quite pale and very surprised-looking, with Blaze and Madame Pomfrey hovering solicitously over him. "What happened to me?" he was asking. "How did I get here?" "We don't know what happened to you, Mr. Baddock," Madame Pomfrey was saying. "What's the last thing you remember?" I was on my way to the prefect's bathroom. Then I remembered I left my history of magic parchments in the meeting room. So I stopped there, and when I opened the door, Malcolm paused and frowned. a line of concentration denting his forehead. You what? Blaise demanded, and was rewarded with a sharp look from Madame Pomfrey. I don't remember, Malcolm announced despairingly. He looked entreatingly at Madame Pomfrey. How long have I been here? Have I missed the pub crawl? Ginny retrieved her water and returned to the others at a swift pace. When she drew the curtain back, she saw that Harry and Hermione were fussing over Ron, who appeared to be trying to shoo them away. Draco was sitting quietly in his bed, watching it all with a blank expression. It doesn't look as if Malcolm remembers how he got here, she said, handing the glass of water to her brother, who was now very green. Someone must have put a temporary stasis spell on him or something. Does he know who? Draco asked, looking interested. Malcolm was, after all, one of his own chasers. Ginny shook her head. He doesn't remember anything. Nothing at all? That's what he said, Ginny replied, setting herself down at the foot of the bed. Ron drained the glass she had handed him and set it down on the nightstand. That's too bad, he said. Some of the color was starting to come back into his face. The water must have helped. I wonder what actually happened to him. Hermione was shaking her head. Things have been very odd lately. I'm glad Christmas is coming and we can all go back to the manor. Right, said Ron, because nothing weird ever happens there. Draco made a face at him, but Ron took no notice. Well, we should probably let Malfoy here get some rest, said Ron, suddenly, and everyone stared at him in surprise. You ready, Ginny? Sure, she replied, startled when the curtains were tossed aside again. Darling! It was Blaise. Malcolm's all right. Isn't it wonderful? Of course he has no idea what happened to him, which is too frightful. But Madame Pomfrey says he'll likely get his memory back over time and... What are you all still doing here? She asked and glared at the Gryffindors. We were just going, Ron began edgily. Not that it's any of your business. Her eyes narrowed. You think that head boy badge makes you important, don't you, Weasley? She said in a purring sort of voice, and reached out to stroke a finger gently over the silver front of his badge. Ron, looking like a trapped rabbit, didn't move. Isn't that sweet? She dropped her hand, smiled, and flounced away, the infirmary door slamming behind her. Nice girlfriend you've got there, Malfoy, said Ron acidly. Thanks, said Draco. I made her myself. See you later, Malfoy, said Harry, and took hold of Ron's arm. We're off to get ready for the crawl. Coming, Ginny? Yes, she said, a bit reluctantly, as she had been hoping to snatch a few seconds alone with Draco to ask about the kiss. But Ron and Harry had already started walking, and she had no choice but to follow them. And I'm off to the library real quick, said Hermione as she watched the others leave, then reached down to pick up her rucksack from the other side of the bed. I have some books to return. Actually, Draco said quickly, could you stay for a second? There's something I wanted to ask you. Oh, said Hermione, and straightened up. She glanced towards Harry, who nodded. Sure, she said, and sat down in the chair beside the bed. What did you want to ask me? Draco waited a moment to make sure the others were out of earshot. Then he turned the full weight of his grey eyes on her and said, Now that they've all gone, why don't you tell me what the hell is up with Weasley? Hermione blinked at him in surprise. Ron? What about him? Draco's lips curled into a disbelieving smile. You can't honestly say you didn't notice something odd about his behavior just now? Hermione shook her head, trying to think. She'd been worried about Draco, and concentrating on him. No, she said, but I'm sure you'll tell me. Tell you what? That your red-headed sidekick is acting odd, and you missed it? I suppose you've been having so much fun playing What on Earth is Up with Potter that you missed the even more exciting sequel. Bugger it, something's up with Weasley, too. Well, what's your theory? Hermione demanded, exasperated. Draco looked smugly unconcerned. I wouldn't know. That's your job, isn't it? He's your friend. How do you manage to say that as if it's an insult? It isn't my fault that you chose to be all buddy-buddy with an overgrown gingery lummox, who lose a battle of wits with a stuffed iguana. You think I won't smack you just because you're in hospital, don't you? Hermione demanded calmly. She was grateful to see Draco scoot back several inches. I've no idea what bee Weasley has in his bonnet, he said, but I do know something's bothering him. None too surprising he wouldn't tell you, I suppose. Ron tells me things, Hermione snapped. Draco's eyes narrowed slightly. Has he ever told you he resents Harry for being famous and getting all the attention? I know that already, and I don't think he does anymore. Has he ever told you that he resented you for choosing Harry over him? Hermione looked at Draco in amazement. What do you mean? Ron and I only kissed once. Just the once? Yes, why? You don't think he resents that one kiss just a little? No, I don't. And do you know why? Draco shook his head. Because we both agreed that we were better off as friends, Hermione said. Draco sat forward with such suddenness that she felt the bed bounce. No way. No way did Weasley agree to that. Well, he did, said Hermione. Honestly, it was a relief, to tell you the truth. I didn't really love Ron, and he didn't really love me either. We were just trying to fit into these molds that people had made for us with their expectations. I was always terrified that if we were to date, it would ruin our friendship somehow. But then when we sorted it out, nothing was ruined. You worried that dating Ron would ruin your friendship? Draco repeated, looking curious. Didn't you worry about that with Harry? Hermione looked at him sideways and felt herself blush. He had never seemed remotely interested in her past romantic history before. No, but I guess that's what being desperately in love will do to you. In the back of her mind, she was seeing that day in front of the mirror again. Harry standing there, soaking wet, and saying all those unbelievable things to her, and she'd barely believed them, even when he'd kissed her and she tasted the rain on his mouth. Draco, meanwhile, was shaking his head. Sometimes I can't tell if you and Harry are both stupid, or you just don't want to see things that are right in front of you, he said. Hermione glared at him. This, from the guy who's got his own love life all sorted. Do you think Blaise notices that you look sick every time she touches you? No, but you do, apparently, Draco retorted. It's a bit hard to miss. Right, he said, especially if you're watching. I am not, Hermione began, and checked herself as Madame Pomfrey stuck her head around the side of the hanging sheets and glared. Do not excite the patient, she said severely, and walked away, sniffing. Draco said something unintelligible. What? Hermione demanded sharply. Draco flashed her a vexed look. I said that this wasn't what I wanted to talk to you about. I didn't bring it up, and I'm not sure I even want to know what your problem is anymore, she snapped, and started to stand up. Wait, he said, and caught at her arm. The fire had gone out of his eyes. Now he looked startled, as he realized he'd said more than he should have. Harry said I ought to ask for your help, he said quickly. He was right. I should have asked before. Now she was slightly alarmed and sat back down. Draco let go of her arm. What is it? Is it something about Harry? Not this time, no. It's About me. Draco had found a stray thread on the cuff of his pajama sleeve and was worrying it. She knew he hated asking for help, loathed it more than Harry did. You remember when I told you about the dreams I was having? Yes, said Hermione. His eyes found hers, and any lingering feelings of irritation she had vanished. There's one more thing I have to tell you in that regard, he said, about my true birthday and a mysterious girl. Hermione paused, then looked at him quizzically. A girl? She asked neutrally. Draco looked down at the bedclothes. Yes, that's what I want you to find out about, he said. Her name is Rhysn Malfoy. But I don't think she's actually human at all. It was growing quite dark outside by the time they let Draco out of the infirmary, but even so, Madame Pomfrey stood and wrung her hands as he walked out, looking as if she were quite sure that he would be returned later in several pieces. Initially, Draco had hoped to make his trek back to the Slytherin dungeons alone, but Snape had unexpectedly shown up and insisted on walking him back to the common room. Feeling mutinous, but resigned, Draco followed his head of house at a dogged pace through the halls. As they walked, he noted that the Christmas decorations had gone up that day, but before he could work himself up into a good and proper sulk about missing the pub crawl, Snape, who had previously been silent up until this point, turned to look at him with a sharp eye. I trust you know that I wouldn't normally be walking any student of mine back to the dungeons, as I have every confidence that you could make this excursion on your own. Of course, Professor, he replied, feeling mildly stunned. He hadn't known Snape felt any kind of way about the health of his students, as he was pretty tight-lipped on most subjects. Snape merely nodded before continuing. However, I wanted the opportunity to speak to you about something. Draco cocked an eyebrow. What about? I would advise you to not waste your energy on Harry Potter, Snape replied without preamble. This is your last year at Hogwarts, and you have other things to concern yourself with besides him and his little friends. Draco stopped dead just outside the door to the Slytherin common room and blinked at his head of house. For a brief moment he wondered if Blaise had gone and blabbed about Harry and the rest showing up in the infirmary earlier that day. But no, Blaise would never stoop so low as to run to a teacher. Professor, he began, with all due respect, Harry is your friend? Snape's tone was cool and slippery as glass. Or just someone whom you allow to lead you around? Draco put his hand on the door and looked at the older man. He doesn't lead me around, he said with perfect candor. I want to go where he goes. It's not the same thing. Snape was silent for a moment. Then he said, Very well. Just have a care that wherever he leads you won't be to the very jaws of hell itself. And with that, he was gone, sweeping back up the corridor like a black wraith. Draco paused for a moment, taking in the breath of Snape's words. They hadn't been pleasant, but he knew that the potions master would never say anything quite so dour if he wasn't genuinely worried. He shook himself of this line of thinking. After all, what use was it now when he had somewhere to be? He muttered the password before pushing the door open and going inside. As he entered the dungeons, Draco had to admit that he had been somewhat concerned that the Slytherins would be cool to him on his return, but they were not. Rumors that Draco had been injured as a result of preparing for a duel with Harry. Variations on the rumor were flying thick and fast, and while Draco resented the implication that he couldn't cast a curse properly without it rebounding and nearly taking his arm off, it was worth it for the modicum of peace of mind. Later, Draco found himself standing alone in his room, regarding his reflection thoughtfully in the mirror over his dresser. It showed him his torso, bare from the waist up. Against his shoulder, the scar where the arrow had gone in was healed, and looked like a small, silvery star against the skin. For someone so young, it occurred to him he had certainly done a great deal of damage to the unmarked flesh he had been born with. There was the white line under his right eye, where Harry had accidentally cut him with the jagged fragments of an ink bottle. There was the scar on the palm of his hand, as well as the thin white line on his bottom lip, where he had bitten through the skin when Voldemort had tortured him. He liked his scars. They were like the faint tracery of a map that marked the greatest events of his life. He reached for his clothes and began to dress slowly. He might be spending the evening alone, but that was no reason not to look as good as possible. He chose black trousers, cut from expensive and heavy material, and a dark green sweater. His dress robes were black, shot through with a fine weave of silver and edged with a pattern of constellations picked out in splinters of glass. The heavy silver clasp at the throat that held his cloak was carved in the shape of the constellation Draco, the dragon. As he closed the clasp, the shoulder ached with a brief and fiery twinge. When he left his room, the corridors were already full of people. Girls rushing to and fro with their hair half done, boys in fancy dress robes giving themselves a last glance before the mirrors. Draco edged past them and out into the common room, where a huge fire was burning in the grate. Standing by the fire was Malcolm Baddock, in navy blue dress robes over a dark suit, and beside him was Blaise. She stood perfectly positioned so that the firelight made her long hair glow, turning it to fiery tinsel, and the faint outline of her body showed through her pale gray dress robes. She smiled when she saw him. "Draco," she said, and held out her hand. He went towards her, some part of him glad that she wasn't angry, although how could she have been? Everyone knew that Dumbledore had forbidden him to leave the grounds, and she could hardly expect him to disobey that edict. This meant that he had never had to tell her that he'd already agreed not to go to the pub crawl, which was a nice freebie. If one could consider the consequences of nearly bleeding to death a freebie. "Look at you," she said. "You're gorgeous." "So are you," he said, which was the flat-out truth. He kissed her cheek, and she accepted it graciously. Malcolm looked on, smiling with eyes that matched his robes. Before he could speak, they were joined by Tess Hammond, looking like a brick wall in scarlet robes, and Pansy Parkinson, in her school uniform and a woolly winter hat. "Pansy," Blaise drawled, "you're not going like that, are you?" "I'm not going at all," said Pansy coolly. "I agreed to stay back and hand out leaflets." "How utterly boring," said Blaise, arching her nose into the air, taking Draco's arm, and flouncing towards the common room exit. Draco let his mind go blank as Blaise steered him upstairs and down the hallways that led to the great hall. "I don't know what's going on with Pansy," Blaise was saying in his ear as they entered the vestibule before the great castle doors, which had been flung open for the occasion. "She has enough cosmetics to stock up one of her father's silly shops, and then she shows up looking like something the cat sicked up on the rug." "Fascinating," said Draco with great insincerity, but fortunately Blaise fell silent as they paused to look around at the decorations. Hogwarts had outdone itself this time. Huge sparkling icicles floated in the air, wrapped around with ropes of silvery tinsel. The 4 Christmas trees at each corner of the room were strung with brilliant glowing lights in the shape of flowers and brightly wrapped sweets, and the heavy end tables that normally decorated the room had been transfigured into friendly-looking reindeer, although unfortunately they were still no more intelligent than end tables and kept bashing into the walls. Draco let go of Blaze's hand and jumped to the side as one narrowly missed him with its antlers. Blaze sniffed. "Those silly things should not be allowed," she opined, and glared at the offending creature. "Go away!" she commanded, and, with a scuttle of hooves, it fled. Draco grinned. Everyone was afraid of Blaze, even furniture. She returned his smile with a satisfied look, which modified into a concerned pout. "You will be all right, won't you, darling?" she asked. "I'd stay with you, but—" "No, you shouldn't miss your pub crawl," Draco assured her firmly. "Have a good time." He looked over at Malcolm Baddock, who was standing with Tess and looking haughtily around the room. Pansy seemed to have vanished, presumably to distribute leaflets. "Take care of her, Malcolm," he said, and lightly kissed Blaze's silky, jasmine-scented cheek. Then he walked her to the door and watched as Malcolm led her down the stairs along with Tess. He felt a mixture of regret and relief, knowing that he probably could have talked Blaze into spending the evening with him in the common room, doing what she called things my father wouldn't approve of because he thinks I'm a good girl, which was usually good for killing bothersome thoughts that might otherwise plague him, but he really hadn't wanted to. It required too much disassembling energy, and he was exhausted. "Malfoy, how you holding up?" He heard Harry's voice in his head, clear and strong, and knew he must be nearby. He turned slowly and scanned the room and caught sight of Ron first. Because he was so tall, his bright red head was always visible above a crowd. He was in the middle of a knot of Gryffindors who were laughing and talking together. Now that the Weasleys had a bit more money, Ron was always impeccably turned out. Draco surmised that the years of frayed and outworn clothes had hung very heavily on Ron when he was younger. Now he wore sharply cut blue dress robes over a charcoal-colored suit, his head boy badge gleaming on his chest. He was talking to a morose-looking Neville Longbottom, sad-faced in orange dress robes. Next to him was Harry, with his back to Draco, holding Hermione by the hand. "I'm just fine, Potter. You?" "Fine." Harry turned around, and Hermione turned around with him. She looked up at Harry and smiled, and Draco looked away quickly, but the image stayed in his head. He couldn't see the dress she wore, as she was wrapped tightly in a soft white cloak, but he saw the way her dark brown hair fell sleekly past her shoulders, fastened with pins in the shape of white flowers. In her ears glittered the tiny diamond earrings Harry had given her for her birthday in September. He remembered the first time he had seen her dressed up like that, when she'd been 14, and up until that moment had never thought of her as a girl before, much less a beautiful one. "Malfoy, you're going to be all right. I wish people would quit asking me that," Draco snapped, with more force than he'd intended. "It's just a bleeding pub crawl, Potter, not the Quidditch World Cup." Harry raised both eyebrows and seemed about to respond, but then the Gryffindor crowd seemed to reach a joint decision and began surging towards the stairs in a flurry of boys in dark cloaks and girls in candy-colored dress robes. Hermione stood out among them in her white cloak, like a pale flower in a bed of bright roses. She cast him a brief, searching glance as they went by, and smiled. He did not smile back. Leaning against the door jamb of the huge doors, Draco watched them all spill down the stairs in twos and threes, shouting and laughing. Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the rear, standing close together as they always did. At the bottom step, however, they paused, and Harry and Ron turned towards Hermione, who was gesturing urgently. Draco saw Harry nod, and then Hermione kissed his cheek, turned, and ran back up the stairs, her white hood falling back, her dark hair caught by the wind. For a moment, he just stood and just aesthetically appreciated the picture she made, all dark hair and pale skin against the greater paleness of the cloak, as if she had wrapped her brunette beauty in a shroud of snow. Her cheeks were scarlet, her eyes very bright. It was a moment before he realized that she was running to him. He stiffened in surprise when she reached the top of the stairs and caught at his hands. He felt the soft wool of her gloves warm against his skin. "Please come along to Hogsmeade," she said. "We want you with us. Harry said you can have his cloak if you want it, so nobody will know." She paused. "It's our first Yule together. Do come." Draco looked down at their interwoven hands. Then he looked up and past her, down the steps of the castle, where Harry and Ron were waiting. Harry was looking up at them, and behind him Ron was an inky shadow against the white snow. Even his fiery hair was darkened by the night. He was looking off towards Hogsmeade. "I should stay here," Draco said. She looked at him, her dark eyes troubled. "Are you sure? The cloak is at the foot of Harry's bed, and the password is—" "I'm sure." She bit her lip. "All right." "Have a good pub crawl, Hermione," he said, and let her hands go. She backed away from him with a half-regretful smile, then turned and walked down the stairs towards Harry. He caught at her hand and waved a farewell to Draco, and then the three of them were gone, under the bright moonlight, disappearing into the burnished lane between the trees.
"Alas, my love, you do me wrong to cast me off discourteously, for I have loved you for so long, delighting in your company."
"Well, I got them to sing," said Harry, looking down at the clamoring set of green-stemmed wine-glasses that sat on the table in Kelly and Ping's House of Enchanted Curiosities. "Now how do I get them to shut up?" Hermione giggled at his bemused expression and tapped the nearest glass with her wand, and the music stopped.
"It's a lovely present for Narcissa and Sirius, Harry. Get them."
"Yes, do," said Ron, looking up and grinning. "I'm sick of shopping anyway. I want to get over to the winery and see what Fred and George have cooked up." Harry's eyes lit up. "Oh, right. So do I." He looked thoughtfully at the glasses and shrugged. "I'll get them. It's just too bad they don't play I May Be a Tiny Chimney Sweep." Having arranged for the glasses to be owled over to the manor at the appropriate time, the trio headed for Fred and George's. The twins had really outdone themselves with their decorations for the factory. Illusion spells had transformed the huge main room into a jungle landscape, complete with jubberknolls, a fooper, a jungle gnome, and swinging jarvies. There were fountains of wine, lakes of chocolate, and dangling green vines that, on closer inspection, turned out to be green apple licorice. The leaves of the trees were spearmint, and, if nibbled on, would turn the unwary muncher into a cricket for 5 minutes. Silver platters covered with sweets floated by at intervals. Hermione passed up a snogberry cordial, on the theory that it was probably better to save the snogging for the end of the evening. Terry Boot and Padma Patil were taking turns bungee jumping into a bottomless pit, which had been rented for the occasion. Ron wanted to try it out, but Harry shook his head. "Falling into a bottomless pit once was good enough for me," he avowed. The main attraction of the evening, to everyone's surprise, turned out to be Oliver Wood, on holiday leave from his starring position as keeper for Puddlemere United. He was one of the most celebrated young Quidditch players in the country, which didn't surprise anyone who had ever seen him play. It wasn't so much that he was talented, which he was, but that he was grimly determined, and always had been. Ron whistled at the sight of the huge crowd of giggling girls and star-struck boys gathered around Oliver, who was seated with Fred and George on a chair inside a floating pavilion draped with fiery curtains. George and Fred, who was eating an enormous color-changing lollipop, seemed bemused. "Who would have thought Oliver would turn into such girl catnip?" said Ron, grinning as he picked a cup of hot-buttered rum off a floating silvery tray. "Fred and George used to say that the only girl who would ever have a chance with him would be one with really skinny legs and big ears,
That way she could convince him she was the Quidditch World Cup.
Harry cast a sideways glance at Hermione.
Are you going to leave me for Oliver Wood, then?
No, said Hermione,
but I might leave you for that table of chocolate over there.
She arched up on her tiptoes and stared at the groaning tables of food and candy that stretched along the walls. There were white chocolate snowballs, icicles spun out of clear sugar, and powdered sugar penguin peppermints.
You ought to go say hello to Oliver, Harry. He's always so fond of you.
But there's a huge crowd around him, Harry began definitively. Hermione snorted.
He'll talk to you,
she said firmly, and gave him a little push.
Go on, then.
Harry went, and Hermione headed over to the table to nab the last never-melting ice pop off a gold plate before Lavender Brown, who had already eaten 3, could snag it. Ron followed her and snatched up a sugar sardine. Hermione looked at him and wrinkled her nose.
How can you eat those things?
Practice, said Ron, and bit the sardine in half with flair.
Ugh,
said Hermione in a decided manner. Scrummy. Ron grinned around the sardine. I dare you to eat one.
Ugh, no way.
Come on. He held out a sardine, and she laughed and batted his hand away.
You never ate that blood lollipop I dared you to in 3rd year, she pointed out smugly.
I licked it, though. Ron shuddered. I'm pretty sure that's what evil tastes like.
Well, I'm not licking your sardine.
No, put in Lavender, who had evidently been listening.
Harry wouldn't like that, would he?
Ron choked on his candy.
Lavender,
said Hermione, but Lavender had already sidled away with an evil grin. She sighed and looked at Ron.
I don't think she's ever forgiven you for that Uranus comet, she said.
But Ron was looking past her, towards the pavilion floating on its lake of peppermint syrup.
Harry seems different, he said.
Better. Hermione turned and saw Oliver Wood standing up to give Harry a brotherly hug.
He is a bit better these days, she said.
Do you know why? Ron's eyes were intent. Did you say something to him?
Well, I said a little, but I really don't think it was me. I think it had something to do with Draco nearly getting himself killed. I think Harry's been trying to focus on other things besides what's been bothering him, and that gave him something to focus on. You know how he is. He likes to have something to do, to feel like he's being effective. Otherwise...
He freaks out, Ron finished.
Right.
Well, it's great that he's back. I just hope it stays that way.
You don't sound very happy.
I am, said Ron slowly, and she could tell that he was measuring his speech. But considering that he spent 6 months refusing to tell me what's wrong, and stonewalling you when you asked him, calling me pessimistic when I hear the problem's cured itself. He might be shoving it down for now, but it'll just come back later, whatever it is. Hermione bit her lip and looked back at the pavilion. Harry had already left it and was moving back towards them through the crowd. She had no trouble picking out his dark hair and red-lined cloak, even in the tightly packed throng. But then, she had always known how to find Harry. She turned back towards Ron.
It's not fair, she said,
her voice low and fierce. Sympathy flashed in his blue eyes. I know, he said, but you can't let that get in the way of your life, Hermione. Harry wouldn't want that.
Wouldn't he?
She thought, as Harry came to stand beside her and clasped her hand with his.
Wouldn't he, though?
Draco stood at the castle's front door and watched the 7th years leaving until the grounds were empty and he could once again hear the wind. Then he turned and went back inside. There was a certain lonely gloom to the entrance hall once all the students were gone, despite the festive decorations. The only person there was Pansy Parkinson, clutching a large red-ribboned gift box. She glared when she saw Draco, and disappeared down the stairs that led to the Slytherin common room, her booted feet crunching on the discarded bits of tinsel and confetti that littered the floor. Draco looked after her, shrugged, and headed towards the double doors in the far wall. They swung open to let him through, and he walked into the great hall. The Christmas decorations here were much like the year before. Glowing lights, glittering taper candles, rows of pear trees, in whose branches chirping partridges fluttered their pale wings. Brightly wrapped crackers floated about 6 feet off the ground. He glanced over at the high table and saw Lupin making what looked like uncomfortable conversation with Snape, and next to him sat Dumbledore, who was deep in conversation with Madame Pomfrey. His gaze flicked over the crowd, mostly composed of younger students he didn't recognize, and saw Ginny in a green sweater and dark trousers, crowned with flames of fiery hair. Next to her sat Seamus, blond and handsome, talking animatedly and holding a wrapper out for her to pull. He saw Ginny laugh and shake her head as she grabbed the other end and pulled. There was a muffled explosion, and the air filled with flower petals, tiny sweets, and a small parcel of toys. When the smoke cleared, he could see how happy they looked, uncomplicatedly so. It made him sad in a way he had not expected. The two of them began to sort through the debris, picking up parcels and opening them with equal smiles on their faces. Draco had to turn away. He felt voyeuristic and desperately out of place. Silently, he turned away from the hall and headed back to the entryway. He pushed the double doors open and went through them, unaware that Ginny had turned just at the right time to see him go. He went down the front stairs of the castle and headed east towards the rose garden. It was empty, as no amorous couples had yet taken up residence in the bushes. The stars were lovely, and his boots crunched on the ground dusted with a light sugar coating of snow. He made his way down the narrow path between two bushes strung with colored lights. Alone in the garden, scented heavily with roses and wood smoke, under a sky dusted with glassy shards of stars, he felt lonely. This was not unusual for him. He had grown up from a self-contained child into a self-contained young man. It had never really occurred to him until a few years ago that he might need anybody else, that there were other people in the world as real and alive as himself. Harry, Hermione, Ginny, they seemed to radiate a bright spirit that he was no part of, and that he did not truly understand. He saw Ginny again against the backs of his eyelids, sitting next to Seamus, and thought that perhaps, after all, he had done the right thing by not choosing her. It wasn't until his shoe struck against something hard that he realized that in his distracted state, he had wandered off the path and into the ornamental rock garden. He turned to go back, but the path was no longer deserted. There was someone there, someone in a green sweater, her face framed in a cascade of fiery hair, someone who was watching him as intently as earlier he had watched her. "Ginny," he said. It was past midnight, and the Three Broomsticks was full of laughter and shouting and smelled of cinnamon and apples. Hermione, feeling pleasantly warm and contented, was sitting at one of the long tables before the fire, her gloves off, a pint of fire whiskey in her cupped hands. With a yawn, she glanced over at the far side of the room, where Harry was standing beside Ron. They were laughing at Neville, who, with Justin and Dean, were playing a game of blindfold spark, and had just walked into a wall. She saw Harry put his hand out and turn Neville around so that he was facing the proper way, and smiled to herself. She noted the way the room seemed to rearrange itself around Harry, so that he was its focal point. But maybe that was just because he was her focal point. It was a moment before she realized that someone else had come to sit next to her, and was looking at him as well. It was Blaise Zabini, a little smile on her lovely face, and her forest green eyes shaded by her thick lashes. "You know," she said in a conspiratorial tone, as she nibbled thoughtfully on a maraschino cherry bomb, "I have to compliment you on the way you've cleaned Harry up. I used to think he was terribly funny-looking, but you've really improved him." "Thank you for that veiled insult, Blaise," said Hermione tightly. "Oh, no offense meant," said Blaise sweetly. "He's just gorgeous now. I could eat him up with a spoon." She bit another piece off her candy and smiled. "If you're going to leer at my boyfriend, do it elsewhere," said Hermione coldly. "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind," Blaise replied airily. "After all, I've seen you looking at mine." And then she was gone, sashaying into the crowd as if she owned it. Hermione looked after her with loathing and a small cold feeling in her heart. She turned and saw Parvati staring at her with both eyebrows raised. "I didn't know you knew her," she said. "I don't," said Hermione shortly. "Well, Harry and Ron certainly seem to," said Parvati, her voice laden with irony. "What?" Hermione turned and saw, with a start, that Blaise was now standing next to Ron and Harry. She was tossing her bright red hair and laughing. Both Ron and Harry were staring at her, with identical expressions of astonishment. In a flash, Hermione stood up and was at Harry's side within seconds, placing herself between Blaise and the boys. Harry blinked at her, looking surprised. "Hermione, did you decide you wanted to play blindfold spark after all?" "No," said Hermione, ignoring Blaise, who was looking at her with amusement. "I want to go for a walk." Harry blinked at her. "Okay." Hermione took his hand. "With you." She looked at Ron, who was glancing between her and Blaise with a curious expression. "You can hold the fort down without him for a minute." Ron returned her look with a very peculiar expression. "Sure, if it's important." "It's important," said Hermione, and yanked Harry after her with such force that his glass flew out of his hand. She saw Ron catch it in mid-air out of the corner of her eye, and was vaguely aware of Blaise calling after them, something about the boys outside throwing snowballs at unwary couples, but Hermione paid no attention. She pushed the front door of the Three Broomsticks open, pulling Harry after her, and didn't stop until she was at the foot of the stairs. "Okay," said Harry, once she had paused and turned to look at him. He seemed bemused. "That was a credible imitation of a bat out of hell. What's wrong?" Hermione looked at him, realizing she was out of breath. "I just wanted to be alone with you," she said lamely. "Okay," said Harry again, very reasonably. "Why?" She opened her mouth to respond, then paused as a group of giggling Ravenclaw girls pushed past them and began mounting the stairs. With a sigh, Hermione looked up and down the street for somewhere they could go. She glanced to the left and saw that a small iron gate that barred the way was still there. With a quick "Alohomora," she opened the gate, and then she and Harry were through, and he was closing it behind them. It was a narrow, dead-end alley, lit only by the lights coming from the windows of the Three Broomsticks. The cobblestones underfoot were slick with a sheen of ice, and there were empty butterbeer and dragon's blood vodka boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. Harry looked around at the bare stone walls and shadowy darkness, the narrow strip of starry sky overhead. "What's going on, Hermione?" he asked, and turned to look at her. The wind blew his black hair across his face, and in the sharp-edged moonlight she could see herself reflected in his eyes. For a moment she stood there, unsure. The night was lovely. The starlight tipped Harry's hair with silver, glazed his bare skin with platinums where the collar of his shirt fell away from his throat, and starred each pitch-black eyelash with jewelry light. Her body trembled when she looked at him, as if it knew things she didn't. He had been looking down at her, half inquiring, half amused, and then whatever he saw in her eyes drove the amusement from his expression. He caught his breath, and she saw the pulse at the base of his throat begin to pound, his blood stirring as hers did. "Hermione," he began, and despite all her misgivings, she pulled him hard against her and kissed him. "Hello, Ginny," he said again. "Sneaking off to Hogsmeade, are you? I'm afraid I'll have to report you." She smiled, then thrust the cup she was holding towards him. "I brought you some hot tea," she said. "I thought you might be cold out here." Coming closer, Draco took the cup from her politely. "Thank you," he said. "Nice of you to think of me, especially when you're busy with your date and all. Or were you bored?" His light eyes raked her face with amusement. "Don't be cruel," she replied. "All right. Look, if you're happy, I'm happy for you." He looked at the cup of hot tea, then drained it in one gulp, as if he were hoping there might be alcohol in it. There wasn't. He handed the cup back to her. "We aren't dating, you know," Ginny said. "We're just hanging out." "Right," said Draco, and sat down on the nearest stone bench, leaning on his hands. He stretched out his long legs in front of him, and looked moodily down at the tips of his boots, which gleamed in the moonlight. His silver eyes were unreadable. "Well, don't be surprised if he asks you at some point." "Would that bother you?" she countered. "Although I'm not sure why I'm asking, as you keep reminding everyone, you have Blaze." "So I do," he said. "Do you mind missing your pub crawl?" Ginny asked him, feeling that the time had come to change the subject. Draco shrugged. "Not so much. I really just wanted to be alone." He checked himself at her expression. "It's all right. I was getting a bit lonely. Sit down." Ginny hesitated. She knew she should go back inside, had told Seamus she was going upstairs to get another sweater, as she was cold, and wasn't sure how long that excuse would hold. "All right, just for a minute," she said, and sat down, as far away from him as she could, which, on the tiny bench, wasn't very far at all. "I'm glad you're better," she added conversationally. "Harry was really worried, and he's been so down lately." "Uh-huh," said Draco neutrally. "He seems better, though, doesn't he?" "You tell me. You're the one who can see into his head." "True," he said, "but I won't." "You respect his privacy?" Draco looked sidelong at her. "Surprised?" "Yeah," she said, "a little." "Fair," he said, and tilted his head up to look at the sky, his eyes thoughtful. "Or maybe I just don't want to know what he's thinking." "Don't you trust him?" "Of course I do. But you can't always control what you think, what you dream about, what you want. If you could, there would be no need for such thing as self-restraint." "Are we still talking about Harry?" she asked, in a voice that sounded thready. Draco looked at her again, his expression surprised. After a moment he said, "Yes." "So, you don't think Harry has self-restraint?" she pressed. "Look, there isn't anyone braver or more determined than Harry, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the kind of self-control I'm talking about," said Draco. "He doesn't hide what he feels. He's never been able to. I spent years trying to hurt him, and let me tell you, with Harry, you always know when you've scored a hit, and rarely injured him. Everything about him crumples up like he's been kicked everywhere at once. It's heartbreaking," Ginny interrupted. Draco looked at her once more in surprise. "I had a crush on Harry before, remember?"
she said. "I used to spend a lot of time watching him. I know exactly what you mean."
Draco kicked a piece of gravel with the toe of his boot. "That must have hurt, when you figured out he was in love with Hermione."
"It did,"
she said quietly. Her throat closed up with the remembered pain of it. Not just her pain. She had also felt for her brother. Later they had talked about it, and he had said that he had always known, but she often wondered if that was true. He had shocked her with how well he had taken it when it happened. Maybe a little too well.
"Anyway, I think you're underestimating Harry," Ginny continued, desperate not to think about that time. "He'd never let harm come to anyone he cared about. My brother, Sirius, Hagrid, Hermione, you."
"Oh, no," said Draco in a remote sort of voice.
"I think he'd sacrifice me along with the rest."
"Draco, he's a hero, isn't he? That's what they do. Sacrifice for the greater good." He was still looking at her, his eyes clear and silver, untouched by any shade of blue or green.
"Harry doesn't need a single one of us, an eighth as much as we all need him. He's a hero. We're his companions. We revolve around what he does." "What about Hermione?"
"He's in love with her," said Draco. "That's different. Although he told me once that she sees him not as he is, but as he wishes he was. That she sees a better Harry than the Harry that really exists. I think he sees her as the custodian of his better self. She protects him, not just from the world, but from himself. Am I making any sense?"
"Scarily, yes," she said.
"But that's a double-edged sword," said Draco, his eyes on her face now, their gazes locked. "Because the more he feels that perhaps he isn't the person she thinks he is, and the more afraid he is that he can never be that person, the more afraid he is that one day she'll realize what he is and leave him, and take with her the version of that better self that he's always wanted to be." He reached out and touched the curl of hair that had been falling in front of her eyes, tucking it back behind her ear in an absent-minded manner. "He thinks he has to be perfect, and that if he isn't perfect, he's nothing. He doesn't understand that we all have to fight our worst impulses to be what we want, that we have to give things up, that we disappoint the people we love, that as much as you love someone, sometimes it just isn't going to happen."
"Again, are we still talking about Harry?"
Ginny asked, her voice very soft. For a moment, Draco was very still, looking at her. The feel of his glance on her face was like a caress. Then his eyes went flat, as if shutters had been dropped down over them, and he sat back and away from her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been rambling. I think it was the blood loss, or something."
"No," she said, and reached for his hand. "You weren't rambling. You were making sense, and I'm glad, because I've been so worried about Hermione and Harry."
"You shouldn't worry," Draco replied, still distantly. "It's Yule. You should enjoy it."
"Do you want me to go back?" she asked.
"No, but you should," he said, without glancing away. "Go back and be beautiful for Seamus. It's wasted on me." She hesitated, looking at him. The moment seemed poised on a crystalline point, sharp and diamond-like.
"You think I'm beautiful?"
she asked. He looked down at their hands, and then back up at her. When he spoke, it was in a toneless voice, made all the more sincere somehow by its lack of effect. "You are so beautiful, it is hard to look at you for very long," he said. There was a long silence. The moment stretched out between them, sharp and tense. In his eyes, she could see the reflected moonlight. And then she did something she had never done before, and she kissed him. She had never initiated a kiss with him before, and she could not believe she was doing this now. But his mouth against her own softened as he leaned into the kiss, reaching forward to pull her towards him. His arms went around her and pressed her tightly against him, so tightly that the clasp on his cloak dug almost painfully into the base of her throat. She could feel his hands on her back, and she felt her blood singing in her veins. And then it was over. His hands were on her shoulders now, pushing her away as adamantly as a moment before he had pulled her towards him. "No," he said, his voice a little ragged, and then more firmly. "No." He let go of her, and she sat where she was. When she spoke, her voice shook. "Damn it, Draco," she whispered. "What are you playing at? If you like me, then why can't you just—" "It isn't right," he said firmly. "Not when I'm in love with someone else." Ginny stared at him. "Sometimes the best way to move on is by actually moving on, Draco." "I'm not sure I know how," he said, and his voice sounded weary. There was a long silence. Ginny was concentrating so much of her energy on not shouting that it took her several moments before she could speak. Finally, she said, "Do you want me to move on, then? Is that what you want?" He looked at her, startled, but she had already stood and was walking away, conscious to the moment she reached the castle doors of his eyes on her back. Hermione did not know how long they had been standing there. They were still kissing, if it could even be called that. She felt more as if they were trying to bridge the gap that had sprung up between them over the past few months and fuse themselves into one person. Harry had frozen the moment she had kissed him, and for a second she was afraid that he would push her away. But then his hands had gone to her waist, and he had lifted her up. Dimly she heard the sound of him kicking the empty butterbeer cartons out of the way, and then she was pressed up against the wall of the 3 broomsticks, the stones digging into her back, and he was kissing her as if both their lives depended on it. Stunned at first, his sudden passionate reaction soon galvanized her own response. She felt great shocks tearing through her nerves, burning away rational thought. They had had kisses before, sweet and gentle, passionate kisses as well, but never anything quite like this. There was something messy and unguarded about the way Harry clutched at her, as if he never expected to see her or touch her again. She felt as if she were falling, and there was no end to her descent. This clash of teeth and tongues, her frantic snatching at the clasp that held his cloak together, hers falling as well. Harry kicked both garments aside and pressed her up against the wall with the force of his body, his hands busy elsewhere. As he moved to hold her more tightly, she could feel the muscles in his back move under her hands. He was shaking, his hands trembling where they touched her face, her throat, cupped her breasts through the material of her dress. "Harry," she whispered against his mouth, and closed her eyes, willing herself not to worry. And then a sudden lancing cold struck her skin, and she opened her eyes in surprise. Somehow, Harry had managed to get the front of her bodice undone. It was open to the waist, the frigid air breaking against her bare skin like dashes of cold champagne. "Harry," she said, more urgently, a sudden nervousness gripping her as he slid his hands under the material of her dress. The dizzying feeling of falling was leaving, the alley and its Everons coming back into focus, the lighted windows, the gate to the north, the open street beyond. "Harry, we should stop. Someone might come and see us." "So what?" His mouth was against her throat, and then moving down. She shuddered with the pleasure of it, and also with an edge of panic. "So, this is private, that's what. Harry!" He was pushing her dress down off her shoulders, and she realized that in a moment she would be just about naked. While she admired his skill at getting her bodice undone so quickly, she was more conscious of the growing fear that someone would come along, Ron probably, and see them.
"Harry," she whispered, "not here."
He appeared not to hear her. "I've missed you," he whispered back. "I've missed you so much." And she felt herself tense as he captured her mouth with his again. His hands were on her skirt, gathering the material with his fingers, sliding the dress up over her thighs. The chill air struck the bare skin of her ankles, then her calves, and now she was shaking with more than just the cold. Without even thinking about what she was doing, she put her hands flat against his shoulders and pushed him away, hard. Harry looked shocked and stared at her for a moment, the dizziness fading out of his eyes. She was reminded of the way he was just after winning a Quidditch match. It took him a moment to come back down to earth, even after he had landed. She supposed, in a way, he had been flying, only she had not been flying with him. "Hermione," he said, "what's wrong?" He didn't know? He really didn't know? She was astonished by his ignorance, and realized she couldn't tell him. Instead, she said the first reasonable-sounding thing that came into her head. "Missed me," she whispered.
"How could you have missed me? I've been right here, all this time."
"You've been here." He reached for his cloak, took it, and draped it back over himself. His cheeks were scarlet, not just with cold, she suspected. "I haven't."
"And now you are?"
she replied, crossing her arms over her chest, covering herself, but still feeling cold.
"Or are you just drunk?"
Harry bent down and picked up her white cloak. He held it out to her, and she took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Maybe," he said very quietly, "but it's not as if I wanted to be with you because I'm drunk. I love you, Hermione. It's just, lately anyway, I can't say it." She shook her head. Her hands, where they were busy lacing up the bodice on her dress, were shaking.
"Why can't you say it?" she asked. "Are you ashamed of me?"
"Ashamed of you?" He laughed. It was a painful sound. "That's funny. Why would you even say that?"
"You don't kiss me or touch me in public. Back here in this alley, you're all over me. What does that say, Harry?"
"Hey," he said sharply. "You brought me here, and then you kissed me. You're my girlfriend. If you didn't bring me back here to shag, what did we come back here for?" he demanded, looking honestly confused. Hermione could feel herself going slightly scarlet.
"Blaise was flirting with you, and I—"
"Flirting?" Harry looked amazed. "She's Draco's girlfriend, and she despises me."
"She does not. She said you were gorgeous and could eat you up with a spoon."
Harry snorted. "I can't believe she would have—" Ah! Hermione jumped.
"What?"
But Harry was already stepping back, brushing snow off the shoulders of his cloak. "Someone threw a snowball at me. Ron!" he yelled. Hermione followed his gaze and saw Ron standing at the alley's entrance, holding his hands up as if to say, "Who, me?" But he was grinning. Behind Ron, she could see other dark shapes, hurling to and fro. The seventh-year boys Blaise had been talking about, who were throwing snowballs at snogging couples. "I didn't have a choice," Ron yelled back. "Neville and Dean would have done if I hadn't." Harry was shaking his head. Then he was racing towards Ron, who bolted away, laughing. Hermione stared after them a moment, thinking,
"What are they, 12?
She walked towards the alley entrance slowly, arriving at the main road just in time to see Harry jump on Ron, knock him over, and began stuffing snow down his dress robes. Ron yelled and began scrabbling in the snow with his fingers in an attempt to make another snowball. Looking at them, she suddenly saw another image superimposed over this one. The two of them rolling over and over in the snow with her, when they were all 14, and it hadn't mattered that she was a girl. She had still been fair game to have her shirt pockets stuffed with ice, and she missed that suddenly. They had been so happy together, the three of them, a perfect unit. Stealthily, she bent down and gathered up a handful of loose snow, which burned her hand with its coldness. She crept up behind Harry, who seemed gleefully intent on shoving snow into Ron's ears, and very carefully dumped the lot of it down the back of his shirt. The yell that greeted this sally was instantaneous and very gratifyingly loud. Harry fell sideways into the snow, yowling, while Ron, sitting up with his red hair full of snow, was speechless with laughter. Harry looked at her reproachfully.
"Hermione, cheating! Don't be a sore loser, Harry Potter," she replied, scooping up a handful of snow and hurling it at him.
Harry reached out and grabbed for her leg, and she slipped and fell sideways onto Ron, who commenced stuffing snow into the bodice of her dress, with a total disregard for niceties. Hermione shrieked and wriggled away, grabbing for Harry with icy fingers. Shouting with laughter, they all three rolled to the bottom of the hill, tangled together, finally fetching up against a large boulder. Hermione sat up first, spitting snow out of her mouth and holding her chest, which was beginning to hurt from laughing. Her dress was soaked, and her hair hung in wet tendrils all around her face, but she didn't care. She watched as Harry and Ron sat up as well, both as thickly covered with snow as if they had been rolled in icing sugar. "Well," said Harry, taking off his glasses, which were almost unrecognizable, and squinted at them. "That was—" He was cut off as Hermione leapt forward and threw her arms around them both, hugging them tightly. Both Ron and Harry seemed astonished at this sudden display of affection. Ron patted her gently on the back. Finally, she pulled back and looked at them, covered in snow, their fancy dress robes drenched in water and sticking to their skin. They could almost have been the two boys who had collapsed on the floor of the wet bathroom after saving her from that troll so many years ago.
"I just want you to know," she said suddenly, surprising herself, "that I love you. I love you both, no matter what happens to us. Ever."
Ron looked at Hermione, and then at Harry, obviously very embarrassed indeed. "Been at the fire whiskey again, has she?" he demanded. Harry nodded. "It's becoming a problem." Hermione held out her hands.
"Oh, come on,"
she said, and without being told, each of them took one of her hands, Ron the left and Harry the right.
"We'll always be together," she said, her voice firm. "Won't we?"
Harry and Ron looked more embarrassed than ever. "Well, not always," said Ron. "I think I'm going to need a hot bath when I get back to the castle, and I plan to do that on my own, thank you." Harry grinned at him. "What, you don't need anyone to scrub your back?" "Nah," said Ron. "Oh, good, because I think that moaning Mona would—"
"Shut up, you two!"
Hermione interjected despairingly.
"Look, just promise me we'll always be friends, because it's our pub crawl, and Christmas is coming soon."
"Okay," said Harry, laughing. "I promise."
"I do too," said Hermione. "I promise."
She looked at Ron. They both did, and it seemed to her that he looked as if somehow her pronouncement had made him sad. "I promise," he said. "We'll always be friends." Quotes. "May I remind you that detention is a time-honored form of punishment" is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. "It isn't my fault that you've chosen to be all buddy-buddy with an overgrown gingery lummox who'd lose a battle of wits with a stuffed iguana" is from Red Dwarf. And that is it for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much again for joining me. If you are new here, welcome. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I have both a Patreon and a Ko-fi on my About page here. My Patreon has not only my own writings, but also my spicy art for my higher tiers. So yes, please be sure to check those out, as I do have some cool stuff. And I did add a free tier recently. I keep on forgetting to mention that. I did add a free tier where you can see some of my other artwork as well. But yes, thank you so much for listening, guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.